We are live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore, and I would like to welcome you to the August 12th, 2024 Planning and Economic Development Committee remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually. And to help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. And for all of you out there today, we'd like to give you a big welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. At that time, your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. And at this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter into the speaking queue. And at this time, I'd like to go through and introduce the committee members and staff who are participating virtually today. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Hello.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hello.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley.
Hello.
And Director of Planning and Urban Design Stephanie Dahl.
Good afternoon.
Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design Chris Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Community Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Good afternoon.
And Real Estate Manager Kim Hunter.
Hello, everyone.
And Economic Development Division Manager Rachel Taylor.
Good afternoon.
And Development Services Director Mark Mathney.
Good afternoon, all.
Okay, great. And at this time, we'll call the meeting to order. And the first thing we have on the agenda today is the approval of the July 8th, 2024 minutes. Can I get a motion?
I'll move.
Second? Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and second. At this time, I'll do a roll call. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Aye.
And myself, aye, and motion passes. The next thing on our agenda today will be the Unified Development Ordinance Update. Stephanie Dahl, Director of Planning and Urban Design. Chris Collins, Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design, will basically give us a review of the remainder of the first bundle of the UDO text and amendments, including housing supportive amendments and options for implementation. This particular discussion will be only for review and discussion only, and it will not go on to council.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Chairperson Kilgore and the rest of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. Slide. So today we're going to talk to you a little bit about our refined approach to updating the UDO and specifically how we are going to be addressing council's equitable and affordable housing stability priority area in the year ahead. We'll talk about what we're going to be doing, how we're going to be doing it, and a couple highlights and some schedule. I want you to be able to walk away knowing these things, that we are now going to, for a bigger impact to the community and to make more progress on council's goals, we are going to coordinate the implementation of the Affordable Housing Plan and UDO updates by partnering on anti-displacement strategies that tie these things together. So that anti-displacement strategy won't be limited to just regulatory items, but will include discussion of financing mechanisms and other kinds of programs. We do have the Community and Economic Development Director, Nikki Reed, here today. She is fully on board with this. And in September, she's going to be helping present with me a more detailed roadmap to council on how we will do this. In the meantime, we are going to focus first on UDO amendments, not necessarily in residential areas, but focusing first on removing barriers along corridors and urban districts. So that's what our bundle is looking like at this point. And as the anti-displacement measures are understood and implemented, we will look at residential zoning district changes. We're basically going to be taking PED's temperature and council's temperature as to when those residential changes should be looked at. So all of this is tied together underneath or held up by noting that we have to streamline the development review process. And again, on top, the way it's covered or looked through as a lens is through that anti-displacement lens. Slide. So what we're talking about in year one for a draft anti-displacement strategy look like the following objectives. We think we can do better on 4 things in year one. The first one is streamlining access to affordable housing for those that are facing displacement. That could look like creating some kind of rental wait list. It's just one of many potential actions. We want to increase access and funding for programs that help low-income individuals or families stay in their homes. That could look like revamping the city's participation in some kind of property tax relief grant. Other options as well underneath that strategy or underneath that objective. The third objective is to alter zoning in displacement sensitive neighborhoods and promote appropriate residential infill in corridors before we address neighborhoods. So that is the potential for not only an overlay that would help preserve existing zoning in certain areas that are vulnerable, but looking neighborhood by neighborhood at what those specific areas might need for zoning. And then the fourth piece is tying increases in development rights, or some people might say upzoning, to significant affordability requirements, and then making it easier to develop housing overall by streamlining some of those processes that we currently use.
Okay, Stephanie, I just want to ask you a question. Now, with this anti-displacement strategies that you have here, and you've categorized them in 4 different categories. So basically, you're saying that this will help us move forward on projects that may or may not fall up under these categories. Is that right? This sort of helps.
This is the framework for a roadmap. We're saying the affordable housing plan needs to be implemented. And so does the UDO update plan. And by saying that if these 4 things are the objectives that we can agree on, and just in year one,
yes,
right? We anticipate that we're not going to solve this in year one. So we're going to be looking annually at ways for us to update the strategy. But in year one, these are the low-hanging fruit things that when we did a crosswalk of the missing middle housing report and the affordable housing plan and looked at best practices and included what the community was telling us, we think that by tying all those things together that we can make some progress.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Also, real quickly, can we take a quick pause? For some reason, the screen that I'm sharing is green on our YouTube channel. So it looks like I'm having a little tech issues. I'm going to do a quick pause, stop sharing the screen, and just check on that real quick.
Great. Councilwoman Turner, would you like to ask your question without a visual?
Sure, I can. I was just going to comment that when I heard Councilwoman Kilgore summarize it in that way, that these would be our 4 key strategies, it made me realize that maybe a 5th one might need to be added for just education along the way. Like, how are we working in those displacement sensitive neighborhoods? You know, because it looks like we might be giving tools, growing funds, but then are we also letting them know? And I imagine that you are, but we might want to add it as a bullet point.
Thanks, Sid.
All right, 1 second. It is still green. I'm gonna do a quick little pause.
I'll ask another question while we're on pause, because I think I read this and it might have been in a memo or maybe watching the PZ meeting. But I feel like first of all, I really like these programmatic approaches. I think that this is really building on, like you're saying here, our affordable housing plan, the missing middle report, also ceasing the harm audit. Like, I think this is a good path. And a lot of this isn't regulatory, it's programmatic, right? And so I feel like in something I read, there was a discussion of how the displacement work will kind of tie into hopefully what will be a successful bond, because not that bond money could fund this programmatic work, but we have current general fund money that funds capital. And so we might be able to, as we look at where the money comes from, there's different rules for it, but that if we grow money for affordable housing, we might be able to expand and do more programmatic work that we hadn't in the past. Is that like a conversation I made up and I'm hoping is going to happen, or I read that somewhere? But I think it's important to bring into the conversation now, because when you look at this, it's like, this is fantastic. Where are we getting the money from? And it's this opportunity that we've been cultivating around the bonds, because this type of stuff will build on stuff in the community that's out there, but also be new programmatic stuff the city will be able to deliver in a really meaningful way.
It's a really great point, and you do remember reading it, because Nikki and I sent a memo to City Manager Deborah Campbell, and I believe it was shared with all of council, and it had a little bit more information than what I'm sharing today in this presentation. It did outline, and I will be mentioning it when we look at the timeline, it outlined how critical, well, it's an important milestone. I don't want to say it's critical, because we will do this strategy regardless. We just will have a different way of approaching it. But the bond referendum that would happen in November would do two things. One is it would provide a specific financing mechanism for things that are capital related. So some of the pieces of work that we would be considering would fall into that bucket. And then, as you mentioned, it would allow council and HCD and AHEC and staff to have a conversation about reprioritizing the allocation of current general funds and how those are used for anti-displacement. So some of those examples, I'll just go down this road anyway for everybody that's watching. Like, some of the things that we're talking about that look more programmatic, perhaps, like that could look like the centralized waiting list that I mentioned, and the property tax relief could also look like a home repair program. So all of those things, as a reminder, are things that we're either really heard from the community already that they're interested in and they're high priorities, or they were recommended in our plans, or they're best practices. And that's why we would be looking at those things first. We absolutely need to be doing some more community engagement, and I'm going to talk about that next. Are you guys ready to move on? Okay, slide. So that was the what, the kind of framework for the what, and this is a little bit of the how and how we're going to need to coordinate and collaborate again moving forward. You know, we know that we have been getting more clear guidance from council, and more importantly, we have all these documents that we are implementing or are now ready to implement, like the Affordable Housing Plan, that are really important for us to keep referring back to and pointing to. Increasing coordination and information sharing between Legacy Neighborhood Coalition, the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, and other boards is a high priority for staff. So we mentioned at our last update how the Planning and Zoning Commission does have a special place in this because of their role in reviewing and providing advice to council on any UDO updates. That's very true. But when we think about tying these initiatives together under the banner of equitable and affordable housing stability, that really is a call for us to continue broadening our engagement. We have been engaging with those folks, and we're going to deepen that moving forward. Some of the low-hanging fruit, or as I mentioned, pieces of our plans that we know we're going to address, is that removing barriers to multifamily housing along corridors and mixed-use zoning districts, the review thresholds, which is something that you heard planning and zoning strongly recommend, allowing neighborhood scale multifamily development in housing ready neighborhoods. So that doesn't mean that every neighborhood has the infrastructure or isn't vulnerable to displacement. And then increasing regulatory incentives citywide to do that, things like density bonuses, a benefits table or incentives table. All of these things we still are looking to look at in year one. We're just trying to give people signals and help people understand that in September, we were coming to present to you what this strategy looks like in detail, and that it's important for us to agree on which pieces of that anti-displacement strategy need to be in place before we do things like citywide regulations. Yes.
When you come in September with more detail, this one that's in bold, that's kind of new language, will you be able to help define for our understanding what housing ready might be? Because, you know, of course, we hear from every neighborhood for every large project that they're not ready. So, you know, just I would need a lot more criteria on that to really understand and proceed.
Okay. And we're going to look at in the next slide, we're going to just look at one example of how we visualize that. But Maggie?
I appreciate how hard it is to like get ducks in a row of planning a process to keep people moving while us also really being eager to like understand what's coming first and what we're handling. And I think some of what I'm hearing is that you're going to put in motion a couple tracks at the same time, and that the first track is going to be, or one track will be this anti-displacement work, which will take a good amount of community engagement, but that we can concurrently be working on corridors and mixed-use zoning districts at the same time. Is that what I'm seeing here?
You absolutely are correct.
And then as we get more clarity on the displacement, and like Sage is saying, you know, what is neighborhood or what neighborhoods are housing ready, where is the displacement risk? Like there's lots to sort through between the difference of our map from the missing middle study to census tract maps to legacy neighborhood maps. Like all of those are a little different. So it's going to take some time to kind of sort through, and that will come back towards the housing ready neighborhoods in the future, but that we're not going to wait on the corridor. So 2 tracks at the same time. Okay.
That
sounds great.
That's how we're going to make progress.
Like
Absolutely. We're going to pick the things that we know that we can work on together, that everybody's in agreement with that. Okay, next slide. This, you know, to speak to Councilwoman Turner's question about what are housing ready neighborhoods and needing more criteria, absolutely correct that there's a lot of ways to address this. In particular, we just wanted to point this out as a potential visualization. This is a map that's from the Missing Middle Housing Report, and it shows areas of opportunity versus areas of vulnerability. You see, and what they mean by opportunity is that it's housing ready because there's infrastructure and there's potentially land and it's residentially zoned. It's not already a park, or it's not on a steep slope or something like that, right? That's high opportunity. And then you have high change. So high change is areas where if we put in new regulations, people are going to be vulnerable to displacement. Many of the areas that you're going to see in green have already seen a lot of infill development, in particular areas of West Asheville. I think people are really familiar with that. So areas that are in red on this map, for instance, could be one option for a housing, a zoning preservation overlay, not a neighborhood preservation overlay, but one way to say perhaps areas in red or similar to areas in red are areas where we would not want to see new zoning changes go into effect until certain anti-displacement measures were met. There's a lot of complication in here. We can't have an overlay district that has a sunset for a time period or do anything like that. Once these things, just a reminder that once we put a zoning measure in place, it's there until a future council decides to take it off. But this is one example of visualizing housing readiness. We did not do the outlines on here specifically to help people really analyze what the legacy neighborhoods are, how much of legacy neighborhoods are covered by those areas in red. But you can see generally where those areas are, and many of those areas do have yellow or red as their primary coloring. For those who are not color blind, and I'm sorry for that we have red and green on this same map in this case. So any questions about this visualization?
Not a question, but a comment. Do you remember when we did the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation thing and Invest Health? Was anyone around for that? Anyways, what we did was bring a lot of community groups together and do a community map of social determinants of health. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if it's a layer in this process.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really great point. We do have a lot of lists of different data sets that we might be able to use. And I think that the determinants of health should definitely be one that's in consideration. Great point. Okay, so next slide, we're going to talk about that bigger schedule for you all. And before I do that, I just want to stress again for people that there are a lot of ways for us to think about, people have been calling it an overlay, a lot of ways for us to consider doing that. And by staff showing that visualization, we are not trying to say that that is exactly what is going to be coming out the other side in September when we show you some more options. We just want to show you one that has been talked about a lot. So for our draft schedule, what that looks like right now is a reminder that all of our continued engagement with different neighborhoods and looking at anti-displacement measures, they're continuing throughout. That is not a point or a milestone in this process. And it really is an umbrella for the whole thing. So we would be coming to you, the starting point is not shown on the slide, but what we would be coming to you is on September 10th, and that's that joint presentation with CED and planning and urban design to talk about how the anti-displacement measures include both the programmatic approaches and the regulatory efforts, how everything ties together. In the meantime, we are moving forward with looking at all of our urban district and corridor potential amendments. That includes amendments that have been strongly recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission and others. This still would need to go through PED and City Council. So if we're bringing those to you in October, that means September is September 10th. We present that strategy to you. And then the Planning and Zoning Commission and PED are looking at the urban corridor and district amendments, and then they would be coming to City Council in October. Then we have this stretch of work to get everything together for our next batch of amendments. And in that stretch, as a reminder, we're constantly going to be coming to PED, and Nikki is going to go to HCD. So she's going to be able to have conversations with HCD, and we'll make sure that the dots are connected, especially on anti-displacement work and how implementation of that affordable housing plan really intersects with all of this UDO update work. A key point, as we mentioned before, is in November. We have a bond referendum, and that bond referendum will determine whether or not we're going with Plan A, which is that we can look at some additional funding for anti-displacement measures, or Plan B, which is we need to work with existing funding and get, we're going to creative either way, but get a little bit more creative and find a new funding source for some of the work that we need to do. Batch 2 can still look like additional corridor and urban district amendments. And it'll most certainly by this time, we will be talking about regulatory items with anti-displacement. This is not to say that if something isn't ready before January, that we wouldn't deliver that kind of regulatory anti-displacement measure to you in advance of January. It's just to say that by January, we feel solid that we can do this. The cycle starts all over again, depending on how council members feel, how members of this committee feel. We will be moving forward with specific residential zoning changes citywide. So I've heard, and I think this is the hard thing to understand, is that I've heard some concern from different members of the community, like, we wouldn't be addressing anything in residential zoning until until a year from now. That's not necessarily true. What's true is the faster that we can move together on making progress on these items and stick with like the plan of when we will see things and get things through the review process, the faster that we can get to some of the items in residential zoning districts. Councilwoman Ullman.
It would be helpful at some point, and maybe a future presentation, to just kind of remind us of past zoning and UDO changes that we've made for the purpose of housing supply, because I do hear an anxiousness and an eagerness. And I feel like anytime working with government, there's this tension between we do work slower than most of us want, but we go slow so that we can go far together, and just kind of like, and so, I hear that tension of like, oh man, it might be so and so months away, but I feel like this council is really boldly taking on a task that hasn't been visited at the scale that we're asking for in quite some time. So maybe I'm wishful thinking, but my understanding is we haven't really dug into some of this stuff. We have for things like short-term rentals, and that had a different goal. We have for other things. So maybe it's more of a, like, if it's a quick scan through of past minutes and a future slide can just kind of remind us on where we are. I think that context can be helpful, because I'm anxious and eager to have way more housing for more people to live here too. And it doesn't make sense if we were to blaze forward and make a bunch of corridor UDO changes without talking to the people that live on those corridors, or without talking to the businesses that work in those corridors. We need to have that interplay. So that was kind of a comment and maybe an ask mixed in. If it's easy to just remind us in a future doc of like when some of the stuff had been taken, that could be helpful.
Will do. We actually have a list of every time we've been to council for a text amendment since the adoption of the comprehensive plan. So we can include that in your council follow-up materials.
Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, I'll add a little to that. I think you're right, Maggie. We're working in the weeds on this stuff, but I think if you're outside looking in, I've heard over and over, council's not doing anything to promote better housing policy. And I'm thinking, oh my God, so many things. But that summary document is probably always good, because people are always, learning about the city. They might just be now engaging in what we're doing on housing, and that history is important. But why I raised my hand was to say, I'm sensing that the resident brought application around backyard lots and cottage things is going to get a little muddy in here. And if that applicant decides to have it heard and we should say not be ready, I would like to request that we bring it back on our own in our timeline somewhere here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if it's going to not pass, because I've heard council clearly say we want this displacement addressed, then I don't think it should just be lost forever. And it would be great if we then brought it back in our timeline that we could. Does that make sense? I just don't want it to go away if it's not readily approved at council because the items required to proceed it are not ready.
Staff can share that with the city clerk's office and the city manager. If I realize that that's a comment really between all of, you set the agenda, and it's really a comment for all you all. But we will make sure that we cross the T or dot the I with communications and share what was said here at PED today about that potential agenda item. Okay. So now Chris, if Chris would join me, I'm going to say one last thing here too, but Chris is going to join me and just talk about what some of those corridor and no district updates could be. I wanted to say one last thing, and that is for you all and the public's benefit, that we recognize that there are many kinds of displacement. There's environmental, social, cultural displacement that can happen and does happen in our communities. And that right now, when Nikki and I are bringing forth an anti-displacement strategy for you, we're really talking about physical displacement. So we're really talking about the cost of housing, rising rents, and those are the strategies that we're focusing on. So does that make sense to everybody? Understand?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. But can I go back to, I'm just a little confused. When we talked about, we're not holding off, when Sage was talking about community outreach to people in the corridors and areas like that, that for us to move forward with updating the UDO to be able to accommodate this, wouldn't that community engagement and people around that would be more or less a strategy we would do after? I mean, because I don't think having community engagement with the people around those corridors is going to impact whether or not we do it, because we know we have to do it to increase housing around transportation in those areas. So I would think that that could be done as far as that's concerned. That's something after we got actually approved. It should not be before we actually approve this. Is that?
I think I understand what you're saying, and the way I'll respond is that we look at public participation as across a spectrum. So it's sometimes we're asking people like, hey, we just need to tell you something. Can you give us your email? That's informing them. And so for instance, by saying we will be updating corridor zoning,
Yes.
We're informing you that this is coming to planning and zoning and PED. You have ways to provide public input and engage with the process is very different than like a full-blown collaboration with neighborhoods on specific zoning. So, that's, I would say to you, we always perform some level of community engagement because we like to be transparent and we want to make sure people can access the process.
Yes, well, yeah, I agree.
And I agree. Yeah.
I agree with that, but I just don't think it's an issue where if we had pushback, would the city walk away from doing that? I'm just trying to, so we just really informational only and not really asking for approval to some degree. And that's one reason I just sort of, I just don't want it to be a thing where we start getting pushback from maybe people that's on those corridors where we know that this is what we need and this is what's, I would hate to, and that's all I'm saying. I just wanted to make sure that
That's a good point, Sandra.
Yeah. I think if we open up too much, it's, I don't know. But like I said, I think it's important for them to be informed or whatever. But if we sort of inform them and let them know, the impact of what we're doing and, whatever, I don't see why we should. But I just think we need to be mindful of how we roll that out, if that makes sense.
We'll definitely take it into consideration. And I see our Assistant City Manager, Ben Woody, has his hand up too. He might want these.
Yeah, I was just going to have, I didn't know Councilman Ullman. I thought maybe somebody else had a okay. or maybe, so I was just going to build on that a little bit, Stephanie and Sandra. I think also in terms of corridors and some of the work there, I mean, we still have things like our comprehensive plan. So we do have planning. I mean, we always have to do engagement and connect with the community, but like there are, I think, some policy decisions that have been pretty vetted through our comprehensive plan or other kind of organized planning efforts. So I think when Steph's team go out, they kind of balance what's the engagement needed for particular policy change or regulatory change. And, you know, is some of that been covered in recently adopted plans as well? So I just want to say, Councilwoman Kilgore, that sometimes we do have planning documents or adopted documents that also support some of the policy decisions that council does. So you're not always starting from scratch on engagement.
Thank you.
And I think that's what you're asking.
Yes, that was, yes, thank you.
Okay. So Chris is going to give you some highlights, some examples of the types of things that we'd be looking at just real quick while we close out.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to start real quick here just to orient us to what I'm showing you. I'm going to dive a little deeper into batch 1 of the corridor and urban district amendments. And a reminder, this is all happening with the neighborhood and anti-displacement work ongoing, as we talked about. And also transitioning into that, corridors are a great place to start because, alluding to what Ben said, our comprehensive plan gives us a really good framework for what the future land use on these corridors should look like. So corridor node district updates. From the green side, I call it the schedule you just saw. You saw there's really a batch 1 and a batch 2 for these corridor and node districts anticipated. So what I'm digging into now is kind of that batch 1 October amendment. And this would be focused on a large portion of it on the highway business and regional business zoning districts, but not just those zoning districts. Our corridors are covered by many other districts as well. They're just predominantly covered by these two. And we'll visualize that with data at a staff level as appropriate to find out where we should make those changes in addition to those districts. And as we've kind of overviewed, this would involve increasing incentives for, well, enabling housing through regulatory changes and increasing incentives and bonuses to create affordable housing on top of that housing as well, and reducing barriers and streamlining the development review process along there. And batch 1 is really some of the stuff that are somewhat mature ideas already. That's what we anticipate. And we're definitely, batch 1 would include at a minimum, looking at these residential parking minimums, removal of minimum parking requirements for residential developments. That might be just within corridors and mixed use nodes. We're doing some analysis now to see if we can understand what the impacts would be of that. Development review level thresholds. Y'all have seen this, you know what that means. That would be that expansion of what can be done by right without having to rezone the property. And we would be looking at, is this really a corridor thing or is this a citywide thing? How can we stay on that focus of creating this first step of changes without really getting into the neighborhoods, right? Without creating huge impacts there. Working with things like more flexible building setbacks. There are large required building setbacks in each of these districts now, but also making those setbacks work better through redefinition of things like what is pedestrian-oriented development, how close can these things get to the road, and how can we support the infrastructure needs of these things while enabling that housing. So that's, like I said, I would expect at a minimum you would see these items in batch 1. We hope to have even more developed at that point. Go ahead, Councilwoman Turner.
Sure. I just want to again highlight this point of if we start talking about expansion of by right development thresholds and corridors and mixed use nodes, I'm really going to be personally looking for the counterpart to it, the benefit on the other side. This is why I keep in my mind tying it to an overlay or new option because, you know, like the hotel overlay where you have community benefits. So just know for me personally, I love this. I think we need to expand by right development. For me, it ties to also using our history of these 20 projects we've reviewed recently and knowing those outcomes and trying to get them those outcomes from this adjusted zoning. Does that make sense? So I know everyone on council may not feel that way, but that is what I'm going to be looking for, to relieve some pressure on by right zoning to increase community tools along the way.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That does make sense. And I'll just address that question a little bit by saying we know what the end goal is. There are multiple tools to get there. And that could be, right now it's kind of wide open. We have a little bit of analysis to do still to see how to get there, but that could be base zoning changes, could be an overlay on these areas. There are multiple options. So we'll definitely keep that in mind. Councilwoman Ullman?
Yeah, I was just going to inquire in a similar direction of part of what I appreciate in the framing of the displacement information earlier is the widening of the aperture to say some of the displacement stuff will be programmatic, some will be incentive, some will be regulatory. And so I think that I think that lens is important too, because sure, there's plenty of zoning stuff I'm eager to take on. But like, if you had some pretty cool ideas that would be incentive based, I'd like to hear them too, because the method doesn't matter to me nearly as much as the outcome. So I like these leading ideas that are more regulatory, but as Sage is saying, incentive based type of things are also of interest to me. So, but I think heading in the right track. The last several meetings, I feel like PED, we're having really effective iterative conversations between P&Z, PED, and staff. And I feel like each time you come back, it's getting more and more clear and everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction more and more. So it's not been easy, and I'm grateful for the work y'all are doing.
Thanks. And I can say at a staff level, I'm pretty positive we plan on bringing incentive-based elements that would work with, I know I'm not going to say 100% positive, but I'm close, right? That would work to promote that affordable housing piece, and whether that happens through base zoning, overlay zoning, there are a lot of options. It's just not defined yet. But looking back at that schedule slide, really, if we can get that far for batch 1, we'll get that far. But that's why we're reserving batch 2 of these corridors and nodes, so we can still make some progress while we're working on the more complex concepts as well. All right, and then we're back to the key takeaways. So that was my super brief presentation on my end for you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Okay, our next item on the agenda will be the Duke Energy Land Exchange. Resource will be Kimberly. I know Kim Hunter. Let me just call Kim Hunter, real estate manager, and she's going to, and Rachel Taylor, economic development division manager, and they're going to review the proposed land exchange with Duke Energy for the rebuild of the Rankin Avenue substation. And this is for review and recommendation to full council.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kilgore. So hello.
Kimmy, you know, I call her Kim, then I see Kimmy and it just throws me off.
You're not the only one to say that. So, I'm really appreciative to be here to present to you all today. It's time, right? You've seen this project and it's different iterative stages. And so we're now arriving at the land exchange portion. So next slide, please. All right, so let's review the key takeaways. So this is what we're focusing on in this session. It's that the city has statutory authority to exchange real property it receives for full and fair consideration in exchange for its property. Staff is seeking PED recommendations for council to authorize this full and fair exchange of real property. With the proposed land exchange facilities, the city's ability to improve and maintain key facilities and allows Duke Energy to improve reliable electrical infrastructure in the downtown area. This project prioritizes City Council's strategic priorities of improving and maintaining infrastructure and core services while also prioritizing resources and capacity to maximize the impact of climate and sustainability plans. Next slide. So here we go. I'm going to reorient us to where you've already been. So since it's been a little bit since you've heard from Rachel Taylor, the project manager for this land exchange, I'm going to let you know where we are right now. So as she's presented, I think twice in the past, there are 3 buckets: temporary substation, Patton Avenue, Rankin substation, and real estate process. Up until today, you haven't seen me or heard from me, but ta-da, here I am. Today, we're talking about the part that's right near the end of this process. Hooray, everyone, for doing such diligent work. That council will vote on the land exchange after PED, and we're now in August. So next slide. All right. So here's the land exchange overview. And, I'm going to kind of keep reiterating that this is about a full and fair exchange process. And staff has done its due diligence to present to you today what these components look like. So first and foremost, Duke Energy Progress is seeking to acquire more or less 0.26 acres of land from the city of Asheville, located at the corner of Hiawassee and Rankin Avenue. Now, don't worry, I've got some visuals to show you. So right now we're going to get through the verbiage, and then we're going to really talk through this from a parcel perspective, okay? In exchange for the land, Duke is seeking to deed 0.24 parcel to the city located directly behind the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. So already we're cooking with gas here. The purpose of the land exchange with Duke Energy is to ensure reliable and resilient power delivery to downtown Asheville. Of course, you're all aware that there's a lot of development that's gone on over the years, whether it's residential, commercial, mixed use. And so this reliability is very important at this stage of needing resilience, right? The key outcome of this exchange is for the city to gain a buildable lot for future development and to improve and maintain key facilities. Next slide. I've got a couple more points here before we get to the visuals. The appraisal and appraisal review have indicated that this land exchange would be full and fair. So it's important that you understand and you know that. And should council approve the land exchange from Duke Energy Progress, the city will enter into a 2-year lease for its property so that Duke can begin construction. So we're not going to wait till the end. We want to actually see them have some momentum before we complete that process. And then finally, once the new substation is built and the former substation is decommissioned and remediated, the formal closing will take place to exchange the parcels for long-term ownership. So I've said a lot right there. I want to pause for just a second, see if anybody wants to say anything before I move on to the big visual. Okay, let's go. Let's see the picture. So we're going to paint a picture for you. I don't know about you, but I think words are great. Pictures are even better. So here we are, an aerial of Hiawassee and Rankin. You've noted that I continued to mention the city's parcel at 34 Hiawassee. That's where this red kind of map area is. Currently, this is used for city employee parking. And then you will also note it's behind the Harris Cherokee Center. And then below that on Rankin Avenue, the address being 72 Rankin, you'll see the existing substation. So we're all oriented to where we are. And then you'll also see Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. These 4 areas that I've outlined are very important as we start to move the puzzle around. Next slide, please. Okay, so the current property lines are as follows. We have Harris Cherokee, the nice big building here. We have Duke that owns a parcel here, it's known as 36 Hiawassee. We have 34 Hiawassee that says city, and then below it you'll see it's owned by the city. Below it you'll see 72 Rankin owned by Duke, and then lastly you'll note the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. Next slide. Okay, so once we start doing musical chairs here for a full and fair land exchange, this is what the reconfigured Duke property line will look like. You'll see that this property will go to Duke and they will retain 36 as well. If you go back one slide, you'll see that there's a U-shaped sliver between the parcels, and move forward again to the following slide. That gets collapsed within these parcels because that open area is going to be closed and it'll become one parcel. In addition, if you look down towards 72 Rankin, you're like, say what? Yes, there's part of this parcel that will also be part of Duke's parcel and property. But that makes a full area where the actual new station can be developed. And that's really what we're looking for and what we're asking for approval, because this in-place exchange is actually a very high use of how both entities can, especially the city, can end up with usable lot. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so you've heard what I said about this. It's now in a different color, in living color. Next slide, please. Okay, so reconfigured city property. This is really important. It's not super weedy, but it's critical. So you'll see that the city will exchange their parcel for the back half of 72 Rankin, which places it behind Thomas Wolfe. But you'll also notice that this parcel that's the loading dock area behind Harris Cherokee, that actually belongs to Duke now. And so they're actually going to exchange that with the city as well, so that all of Harris property is actually owned by the city. So we don't have that wonkiness that's currently taking place right now. Next slide. Oh, sure. Councilwoman Turner.
Thank you, Kim. Does this address what we heard from Chris Coral, who manages this facility, as would address those future needed loading repairs that limit our shows?
Yes, so
Okay.
I think city staff has done a remarkable job of cross-team management, development, and communication, because it's Chris Coral who really identified core operational needs at that site. And so this dock and making sure that the city owns the land that it sits on, it's going to be a big win. We'll have no confusion anymore around that. And if no one was confused before, that's totally fine. Thank you. Do you have any other questions? A little comedy doesn't hurt, right?
I love it. It's great.
Okay, so moving right along. Next slide, please. Okay, so here you go. Here's the big picture. This is the reconfigured properties, right? And so in here, that's going to be critical, because maybe somebody's thinking it, maybe somebody's going to mention it, but I'm going to talk about the peacock in the room, which is, why does it look like Duke is getting more property? Well, it may look like more property, but in essence, this 34 Hiawassee that I mentioned earlier that the city currently owns is partially encumbered, and partially means about half of it, by air right easement with a transmission line. So it makes the lot mostly unbuildable. And so why this is a really full and fair exchange and why it works out is because now the city obtains a buildable lot. And isn't that a win? Yay. All right, next slide. Okay, so here we are in the next steps, May to August. Ta-da, we're here in August. Duke is actually completing their entitlement process and approval process. If you have any questions about that, they're here. We have some great representatives with us, both Jennifer and Justin with Duke. I think we also have a third representative. Late summer, early fall, again, Duke will begin to prep work to facilitate the connection between the Rankin and temporary substation on Duke Patton Avenue site. And then fall, so that's just, a couple months from now, the city and Duke will enter into the land exchange agreement, which includes the 2-year initial lease. And that's really important that we do that. And then Duke will begin installing and doing the installation components of the temporary substation at Patton Avenue. And then we have an estimate about January that they'll begin that construction of the Rankin Avenue substation. So as far as like seeing the end of this road and all the work you put into it, you'll see that there's all that long sunrise is starting to hit 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're looking towards the sunset. Okay, next slide. All right, so back to the key takeaways. Please be reminded that the city has statutory authority to exchange real property it receives for full and fair consideration. The appraisal and the appraisal review by MAI professional both examined and deemed that this is a full and fair exchange. We are seeking that PED recommend for council a full and fair exchange of real property through a motion. And the proposed land exchange facilitates the city's ability to improve and maintain key facilities and allows Duke Energy to improve reliability and electrical infrastructure in the downtown area. We're looking for resilience. So this project prioritizes city council strategic priorities of improving and maintaining infrastructure and core services, while also simultaneously prioritizing resources and capacity to maximize the impact of climate and sustainability plans. Next slide. Do you have any questions?
No questions, just a thank you. This is my first meeting with you, Ms. Hunter, and I'm thrilled that you accepted this position.
Thank
Great
you, Councilwoman Turner.
Okay.
Councilwoman Ullman or Kilgore, either one of you have any questions? Wonderful. Next slide. So here's our recommended motion. We would like you to consider someone making a motion and a second to recommend City Council authorize a full and fair exchange of real property located at 34 Hiawassee Street to Duke Energy Progress, Inc. in exchange for property located at 72 Rankin Avenue to the City of Asheville. We're keeping it clean here. Yes, Councilwoman Ullman.
I guess I did have a question as I'm just listening and processing. When the proposal to kind of swap some land came about last time, maybe 18 months ago at this point, there was a lot of community conversation and there was a different parcel fundamentally. It was across the street than what is being proposed today. And a lot of concerns were brought up at that time about the design of the new substation. I think some of that was because it would really create a different visual landscape for Lexington Avenue. And given that this parcel exchange is essentially in a very, very similar footprint with a very, very similar view shed, I guess I'm just curious, there had been a lot of work to talk about the design, but this proposal is really just looking at the real estate side of it. But is there more information about the design from Duke that could be brought to us when this does move forward to council? Because I feel like there's been good community engagement, good collaboration with our partner Duke around that. And so reminding us like what that progress looks like and what that's going to be, I think would be important. I'm ready to vote on this, moving it to council, but seeing that design stuff would be helpful. And in the weird event that we like wildly regressed by the time it came to council, I might make a different call, but ultimately I think that seeing all that community progress would be helpful for council to have a full vote. So I guess there was a question snuck in there, and the question in a more concise way would be, I'm ready to vote on this, but could we also have some context on the design proposal from Duke and kind of the aesthetic approach that they're working on? Because I know that progress had been made with the community.
So I'm wondering, so forgive me for maybe my lack of order here, Robert's rules. Is it feasible to actually vote and then we answer your questions about, because Rachel Taylor is the project manager and we have Duke on board. So I'd love for them to come in and provide you with more of the details that might be important to you. Would you consider voting first and then we can get them on deck?
I think that's a great plan because it's not like we're not
Well, we don't have an active motion yet. We can hold on a second, but I have one more comment to add, and then I'm happy to make the motion because I think, to Kimberly's point, we should just keep moving because I think I'm with Maggie, signaling a second yes. Like, let's move this to council. But I have one more piece of information I'd like to see alongside her request with additional design information and process information. And that is, this is my first time doing a land exchange outside of a affordable housing project. So a land exchange for utility is foreign to me. I don't know much about how these transactions usually play out. If you could provide us with some summary of, is there ever a monetary exchange? Is a land for land always the way this works? Or just some kind of background to help me know I'm making a good decision because I have not made this type before. And I don't need it today, just ahead of council.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd be happy to provide that information. Those are great questions. I think some of that we are definitely willing to present with today, right now, after your motion and potential acceptance of the vote. And then I also have information about the types of land exchanges and things of that nature. So
great. It might be best for our council meeting though, just so everybody gets to hear it and we don't all have to say it twice. I know we have a really long agenda today. But the other thing is, I guess if there's appraisals, can you summarize those appraisals for us in that data for council? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to make a motion if we feel like we're ready. Okay. I move to recommend City Council authorize a full and fair exchange of real property located at 34 Hiawassee Street to Duke Energy Progress in exchange for property located at 72 Rankin Avenue to the city of Asheville.
Motion, I have a motion, like a second.
I second.
Great, I got a motion and a second. At this time, I'd like to do a roll call. Councilwoman Ullman,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
and myself, aye. Motion passes, and then we'll just turn it over to Rachel. Thank you.
Ms. Hunter, did you get those 4 things that I heard? Like the one from, you got them. Okay. I guess you can watch back. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Project Manager and Economic Development Division Manager Taylor, take it away.
Thank you. So yes, we can definitely incorporate all of those elements into the presentation and the materials for council. But I wanted to show you all the design work, and I believe we have shared some of these elements in some of our previous updates. So basically where we are right now is that with the Rankin portion of the project, Rankin Avenue, the design elements that you'll see here have gone to design review committee for informal review. Later on this week, they will go back with the incorporated recommendations from the committee for formal review. So we don't have those latest updates this week because they are pending review from the design review committee. So these have gone through a number of collaborative kind of design review phases before it even reached the design review committee. Staff worked with Duke to incorporate a lot of the feedback that we had heard through the initial commentary from community, in thinking about the needs of Harrah's, the needs of Duke, and then again those community needs as well, to kind of encompass a design that worked for all parties. And Councilmember Ullman, you had mentioned the view shed from Lexington Avenue. One of the bigger elements of the project before, I know this might be a little bit difficult to see here, but one of the elements using the other parcel was that it was going to require a very large retaining wall and the removal of a number of trees on that hill, which kind of increased the visibility and kind of the suddenness of that view. So this way is, though it is still large, it's still a substation. It sort of softens that view a little bit. And Councilmember Turner?
I hate to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Can you see the 2 large posts above the new substation there? I remember when we did the RAD project and the river was lined with the very large new poles. Is there a series of new poles that are going to also run through downtown because this is larger? Is there a lot of pole replacement coming? I saw some scattered throughout those drawings that, you know, these are the huge ones. They're like 24-inch round. They're very tall. Is there a smattering of that will take place as well?
I will not speak to that. I've got Jennifer and Justin from Duke on the call. If they would like to speak to it, I'll invite them on.
Hey, this is Justin. I can speak to that. These are the only 2 poles, except for one small one that's kind of to the right side behind the tree that we were replacing for this part of the project.
Easy enough. Thanks.
Great. And then here's that kind of aerial view. Again, these are initial recommendations. I do want to also say so after these renderings had been developed, we also worked with the police department to do their crime prevention through environmental design assessment of this property. And so we incorporated those recommendations and assessments in a complete review of these renderings. Yes, Councilmember Ullman.
I know that there'd been a group of businesses and residents, I think Friends of Lexington Avenue, that had kind of amassed around this. And I know they'd organized themselves well. Have y'all talked to them about these design reviews? Cool.
Yep, and Jennifer, Justin, do y'all want to talk a little bit about that engagement?
Jennifer, can I defer to you on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rachel, maybe it's okay if I first speak to kind of the design process and where we are. So as Rachel noticed, this was the original design that we brought to the DRC. I just, so that no one's surprised, there were some shifts and changes in the design that we're taking later this week. And so one of the comments was, more, less walls, if you will, and kind of open the space up a little bit. So what you're going to see incorporated is more of the black, and Justin, I might get the material wrong, but kind of wrought iron design that kind of opens up that lot a little bit. And so I just wanted to put that out there. I'm going to pull some information too that references some of the engagement work that was done with with Lexington Avenue. So let me see here so I get my dates correct. We did have a neighborhood meeting, and then we quickly, or right after, released the drawings, and we let people know that we were posting those drawings. If you recall, at one of those meetings, there was some media inquiry, and so we posted those on the website. So they've been out there for public consumption. That is this iteration of the design implementation. We will post the updated drawings once they get through the DRC, but we wanted to make sure that we were operating consistent with that. Our engagement team has had some pretty direct conversation with representatives from the Lexington Avenue organization as well. And I'm sorry, I just actually got a note from our engagement person. She wanted me to just note that the Friends of Lexington Avenue have been updated several times, and the initial location change was first reviewed back in February of 2023, when we had that kind of initial change in the design.
Thanks. I appreciate that additional context.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions kind of about that design or the engagement process? Okay.
Is there anything I can answer for you now that you haven't heard, or would you just prefer we bring it to council? Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty. Okay, the next item on our agenda, we'll have an update on construction permitting volumes and values, and that'll be done by Mark Matheny, Development Services Director.
Perfect. Good afternoon, all. How's everyone doing? Pretty well, I hope. Good news is, while we are going to look at some numbers, the content and the conversation is not going to be nearly as deep as the last two presentations. So you go out on an easy note here. And let's see, let me work a little computer magic and share. One more second. I'm going to try to make this a little bit larger, and we do have some numbers here, may or may not be relative, but it didn't seem to help.
Mark, you should be able to do the slideshow mode. Yeah.
Yep, I'm heading there.
Okay. There
Not quite as savvy as many of the people you work with, so you just gotta hang on for a second. So I'm Mark Matheny, Director of Development Services. We're going to do a development permitting update. Over the many years, you've seen these in a variety of different ways. These updates and all of this. There was a time like November, May, we do kind of a developers forum. We'd show this type of thing, and so this is just a fast and fancy way of doing it right now, and we'll mature a little bit. We have a better access of data that will come after this. So we have good data, but we have a better way of putting it together, and I'm going to explain that in this presentation. What I've done initially is just, we're gonna look at 24 very quickly. We're gonna see how that relates to 23, and then we're gonna get into a little more detail about really since 2018, how things kind of look. So our key takeaways, permit volume in the general construction industry in Asheville remains consistent and strong, although slightly down in this last fiscal year. Residential construction, which I will remind everybody is 1 and 2 family homes, has been the strongest in permit volume over the last fiscal year. I say 1 and 2 family homes because it's based on our permit process is based on the residential code. When you get into multifamily, while a lot of people look at that as a residential aspect, it's a different code, right? So that's actually a commercial code. And you guys may or may not be familiar with a recent Session Law 108, which actually brings within the single family world 3 and 4 family housing, right? So it's actually 1 and 2 family housing, but it's because of Session Law, it's now affected to 3 and 4, and that'll clean up as time moves on here a little bit. And the data provided here is based on a census report that we provide to the Census Bureau quarterly. So, they do every 10 years, they do a census report on populations and all of that. There's always ongoing information that goes to them. But what we've also incorporated here toward the end of the presentation, and the very last slide I have will show information that we've updated and improved the UNC School of Government benchmarking project, and that will help improve the measurable data points, and it is very, very close to its final stages of completion. Technically, it's complete, but there's still a little bit of tweaking that has to be done. They've done just an unbelievable amount of work this past year to really, their initial thing, I think there's 8 different jurisdictions that participate in that. It might be a little more, but throughout North Carolina to do that. Their goal is to really participate as many jurisdictions as possible. But it's a heck of a project. So there's pretty small jurisdictions and counties that may not even have the manpower to do some of this. So, but it really is a super strong reporting process, and so we're really glad to be back in and working on that benchmarking project. So very quickly, the comparison slides we're going to show, they're paired up. What I'm going to show you is volumes and then values, right? And I apologize, it's probably a little hard to see, but and the numbers will become probably a little more relative as we get further along in the presentation. That you don't really have any context to what these actually mean, big or small, right? And so in 2024, here was our permit volume for these units. Now, once again, as I mentioned, that's why I said that in the key takeaways. This is based on the census data. So there's a lot of other permitting that the census isn't worried about. And so these are just basically, it just gives us a standard category, right? There's new commercial, there's commercial alterations, there's new residential alterations, and then multifamily. And we'll talk through this as we continue. And so those were volumes, this is value, and this is construction value, right? This is total of when they come to us and say our permit is worth X amount of dollars, and we're just going to add all those up based on those same number of permits. Same number of permits. And so that's just the hard and fast pieces. So I'm going to show you now really, Councilwoman Turner, go ahead.
Mark, just real quick, out of curiosity, so having completed these applications, permit applications, this is the total of what they're writing, their value of construction costs on the permit application, or it's actually, is there some, people just estimate sometimes.
You're 100% correct, and that's a great statement. So this is the information that is provided to us that is recorded on our permitting documents. Yes, great question or statement. So here we are in comparison, and this is really how 23 and 24 tie together. Once again, it's kind of the 5 categories commercial new alterations, residential new alterations, and then multifamily. You can see that the new residential has come up a little bit from 24 to 23. That's, if you can see the numbers, it's about a 12% increase from last year, right? Which isn't gigantic. But the interesting thing is we're going to move to the next slide and we're going to see the values, right? So that was the volumes where we had a 12% volume increase. We really have about a 27 or 28% value increase. And this is just in the new residential, right? I'm just using that as the example. And so, and why is that? Well, we all pretty much know, right? Because construction is incredibly expensive right now. Whether it's the materials or the labor or the land, everything relative to that is expensive. So, you know, there's always a balance that happens, whether it's a balance between residential leading the way or commercial leading the way, or whether it's new or alterations leading the way. But then it's also where the value increases and the volume decreases. They're historically year on year, there is a similar balance that occurs. There's no predictability to it, but it does very generally work a very clean balance. So, yes.
Yeah, just want to ask you a question. When you talk about the new commercial and you talk about a new multifamily, a lot of the large housing projects, are they considered commercial or multifamily?
Yeah, excellent question. So basically, until this year, everything, and it's still in this data, basically everything that is above a duplex is multifamily, right? So if you have any relativity to multifamily, it's basically going to be in that multifamily. It's going to be in the commercial world. It's not going to be captured in the residential. Up until now, because of the session law, residential was really 1 and 2 family and townhomes, because that's the way that basically the building codes are modeled. That's their structure.
So I'm still a little confused. So in this commercial, none of the high-rise units with 300 and 400, those are not in this commercial. They're in this multi. They are.
Okay, good. Yeah. That's a great question. So no, most of that is gonna, you know, anything that's like our Eris that has multiple feet, that's going to be commercial. That's truly
that's what,
yeah.
And some of the larger apartments with the big units, those are commercial and not in this. Is that right? Or no?
The big
Anything
ones
that isn't
like 200 apartments would still be multifamily, but the Eris I suspect is commercial because it has a restaurant, a hotel component,
Yeah.
and you know some
That's right.
condos.
So basically, a lot of the ones downtown would be considered in the commercial and not in
How
the.
about this? Maybe what you mean
That's
is mixed use. Because if you have an apartment complex of just apartments, it's multifamily. But some of these Eris are mixed,
Yeah.
commercial, residential, hotel. Maybe
Yeah.
that's more what you mean.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea because with the commercial being that high, the 23, and then it comes all the way down to 24. I was trying to sort of figure out, was that within some of the larger, developments, or is it in sort of the,
Yeah, and what we'll see historically is a big jump in commercial is if a big project comes in. In 2016, our commercial was off the charts because basically we had the hospital, we had the addition to the hospital, we had the art museum, we had Eris starting. So commercial was just off the charts, while multifamily would have been, any apartment complex that was being built at that time with multiple buildings on that. And this is another piece to understand on the multifamily, the apartment complexes. We don't currently capture the individual units of the apartments. For condo, we would, because it's a different piece. But for the apartments, this is a per building capture.
What you bring up.
Okay.
Well, I'm just jump in, I guess. Thanks, Mark, for all
thank
this information. I have kind of like a running list. I was going to wait till the end. But what you just brought up triggered one of the questions.
Okay.
On it's kind of a wish list of like Could we see this data? I love that we're getting this update. I'd love to see these updates quarterly or regularly, just so we can keep a track and a pulse of how things are going. But one of the things I think understanding the construction value is really nice. I think understanding the number of permits, but at the end of the day, I want to know about units. I do. I want to know about how many units were being added. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do my little data wish list.
And tax value.
Yeah, and I understand. I had this conversation with sustainability a lot. Like at one point in sustainability, we had a full-time person who was just doing data. I get that my wish list might have some reality of being able to offer, but like I would love to see the number of housing units. I'd love to see the number of permits pulled to the number of projects completed and the time. I'd love to see a map of these projects. Anecdotally, I hear, and every time I'm off Sweeten Creek, I say, wow, they're doing a lot of building here, but a spatial understanding of where this stuff is happening would be just really helpful for decision-making conversations. I understand it might not change the way a permit happens, but for us to really get that type of elevated view and context could be really nice. And then the number of permits pulled to projects completed and the timeline, and just also like, what's that permit turnaround time? Because I'll hear, oh, it takes forever to get a permit. And then I always want to know, like, is that true? What is forever? What time is money? So those are some things that if we get into a rhythm of kind of quarterly updates, I'd love to have some of those data points.
And Maggie, from our earlier presentation with planning director, we were looking at, areas of the community and neighborhoods that were, high and ready for housing. And do these fall in? It'd be a good overlay, right? Mark, if I'm going to add to Maggie's wish list, I'm going to add tax value. I'm also curious. I hear often from smaller developers that are trying to do neighborhoods or subdivisions. And I hear anecdotally that there are many, many subdivision applications and very, very few that pass. So I'd love to know if this is true, if we're actually turning down subdivisions because some other thing, the open space doesn't work or the infrastructure is not there or something. And then lastly, I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, this new multifamily turquoise here on the right, do you think this is what you said earlier with commercial projects that just happen to fall in certain timelines, or is it possible that we're seeing, because it was more multifamily applications, but are we seeing more applications but smaller projects? So this might be like more duplexes. Okay, so smaller projects, less value, more applications, which is good. That speaks to missing middle, right? Like we would hope that that continues that trend because we don't want just large projects.
But say that's different because 23 we had more multifamily.
Well, what I'm saying is did this year, since if you look back a couple slides, we actually had more permits this year for multifamily than we did the previous year, right? 47 to 38. So we approved more projects, but when you look at the value, go back to the value slide, the value is significantly less. So there are more projects, but they are smaller projects. So maybe more missing middle, which is a good thing. I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing us as a council want to see. Some of these, not just single family and 300 apartments. We want to see something in the middle. So that's the trend I'm watching in the housing realm. Yeah, this is really helpful. I'd love to see years of data. I used to go to all the development forums when I was not on council, and Ben used to deliver them, I think, and it was wonderful information. Thank you for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you. And as we see toward it's going to be a little bit of a surprising graph. I've got a bar graph that's going to show, that's going to kind of open your eyes. It gets us back to 2018 till now. And so it's kind of an interesting transition. But yeah, so one, Councilwoman Ullman, if I could just address a couple of things, and we might as well just kind of run through a couple of things here. The mapping part, there is, I don't know how helpful this is, but there is simplicity that's out there already, right? From our city site, simplicity can kind of give you a little bit of that. And so I just throw that out there. May not be at all what you're trying to get, but there is something that does exist. The other thing that I want to throw out there is we definitely plan on doing this more regularly because we have a better way of doing it. Right now that the benchmarking is set up and our project managers within DSD have really built that to be thanks, Ben, have really built that to be a much smoother and can capture the data as it comes in and move it to the right spot. Part of the problem that we've had in the last couple of years, honestly, is to mine the data out of our current software is mind-numbing, and it takes so much staff time. I just can't sacrifice that much for that. But the good thing is we've great credit to Claire, great credit to Lennon out of our office. They've gotten to the point where it's manageable through that benchmarking process, but also as we move into the next software. I spoke on this when I did one of the earlier presentations. We have Clarity permitting software that's coming in. Now that's an implementation next fall, next winter. So it's like November. But the nice thing with that is this becomes much more dashboard style for anybody to access, right? So it won't have to be more of a formal piece. But we're glad to continue these open presentations as to what this looks like on a much more regular basis, because we've now really figured out a way to capture how this works. The one, and we'll keep working on the rest of your list. I just want to identify one thing that you mentioned is the permits pulled based on completed and that timeline. As we talk right now, I have no idea how you would capture something like that. That's a tricky one, and I just want to be forward with that. There's almost everything else we can pick up on, but that's a pretty complex one. And also the Councilwoman Turner, your mention on the tax value. I assume that's post construction. I think it's going to be another complicated one, but I think there's probably a way to figure out how that works. So. I just want to throw that out there for a little bit, and let me continue through this. I know we had Councilwoman Turner. Go ahead. You're still
Maybe the simpler way to look at it is I want to better understand how our tax base is growing. I'm not as concerned if 10% is commercial and 40% is residential. I mean, I would love to know that minutia, but like overall, we never really look, other than budgeting, at what our property tax income is, and it's just that one data point. Like, how are we growing, I think is kind of important, especially as we look at expanding by right development and what it might lead to, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. I will touch on a couple of other points, but I want to come through this as you can start seeing some of these numbers in comparison, and then I will catch up on a couple of other points that you brought up. We can talk through anything you want. I pretty much got all night. So one thing that I do want to put in there, and this, we're going to pick this up on a couple of slides, and this is definitely picked up on the benchmarking, but when we show the census data, one thing that never picks up is the trade permits, right? And this is basically your AC changeouts. This is your electrical service changes. This is, your plumbing repairs and all that sort of stuff. And that's a big volume. I mean, can be roughly close to 20%, 30% of our volume, depending on the year, that we process and go out and inspect and work with the contractors and get them, the homeowners and the commercial set up back in functioning and operating. And these are pretty timely pieces, but it is a big volume. So I just always like to throw that trade permit slide out there. And when we were putting this slide presentation together, it was actually before we finished the benchmarking part. So the good news is the benchmarking includes all of that. And we won't have to have a separate slide here. Okay, so now we're getting into some of the fun things. This is volume, right? And so starting from the top, we have residential alterations. The next one down is commercial alterations. Green is the residential. Red is the commercial, and this is going from 2018, right? So this is going to give us kind of a feeling as to where things are. Obviously, with those two, we're dropping from where we were in 2018, right? The yellow is new residential, the middle of the chart. Yellow is new residential, and while it is less from 2018, it's not a monster one. And then we have new commercial is the blue. a little bit down on there. And then very interestingly, the very bottom one is new multifamily, and it just ebbs and flows. So when we looked at that earlier slide, it looked like there was really a significant difference. But if you look at it from 2018, right, we're just not that far off. And there's Councilwoman Turner.
Go ahead, just when you're ready for questions. I want to put my hand up, but I hate interrupting. I don't mean to interrupt you mid-sentence. Okay, so I just want to know your theory on why we're seeing a decline in alterations for both sexes. Do you think this is like home equity lines and high interest rates? I mean, any theories?
Yeah.
All of the above. I would say.
It's so interesting because I feel like in our local economy, when there's such pressure on single family home development and relocating people, buying houses cash, same day, all this stuff, that you would see more home alterations because people can't relocate. They can't move to a larger house because they're not available. It just seems a little counterintuitive to me.
Sage, that's what's going on in the market right now. The market is really...
people are relocating instead of building bigger houses?
Well, just the whole thing. This is like for permits and things, right? So so
this is volume. Now keep that exact same thought, right? This is volume. Now let me flip the slide and look at what we've got, right? So now we've got value, and this is and we had to separate this slide because this is residential and commercial alterations. This is right to your question, right? So residential, which is green, is still going up but you can't do as many because it costs more, right? And you can't really the banks aren't willing to give a large block of money. So what you can self-finance or what you can finance with partnerships is what's happening. But so this one kind of cleans that up a little bit where actually the residential is going up. Commercial's down just because you can't finance those big pieces. So, but I will come back to this slide in case we want to go over anything.
Go back again, Mark. Go back to that slide again when you were saying that commercial. Okay, no, you talk about residential. Yeah, residential went up in 23, but it's headed down in 24.
Yeah, but from 2018, right? From 2018, we're actually still on the rise, and this is value, right? This is value.
Okay.
And then I'll throw the next one in here. Once again, value, and it just we had so many the top line is the average of all things, right? So we just wanted to get some sort of average, and honestly, value-wise, if you look at it, it's not that it is lower, but it's not that far off from where we were at in 2018, right? And so and then there's a big mix, and once again, if you can interpret that whatever that is, that turquoise. In the multifamily, it's still, as the other slide showed, it's still very, very close to where we were in 2018. But y'all have brought up really that point that, at one point we were building, tons of apartment buildings and complexes all at once. And now we just don't build as many, but they're a lot more expensive to build.
Exactly. So Mark, why did you start at FY18? Is there a reason for that?
Because that was first of all, I was planning on just doing like 5 years, but 18, we could actually grab the most consistent data with the data that we have now. And that's really the only reason. I wanted a broad span and we could step back a little bit. And that's the one where we could really gather and make all of this data that we currently use make sense.
Yeah, because if you start at 25 years ago, pretty much, it changes the whole complexion.
It's a big difference, for sure.
Mark, I thought you were going to say because that's the fiscal year that I started employment with the city.
Because I get to blame them for that. But everything went right up.
It does make me
here, right?
It does make me think. I've seen some charts, and I will find it and send to staff floating around social media from our local permitting that shows like them talking about multifamily. And it shows this chart from like the 2000s, and then maybe it hits like 2012, 2014, and then multifamily just drops off a cliff and has never come back. And I've looked at that and, I've been scrolling. And so I haven't paused to go, wait a minute, what did we do? Did we do something to the UDO then? Was there some like federal financing change? Like what happened there? Let alone wondering like, is that someone's, citizen science chart, or is that actual data that holds? But that's a curiosity I have too, of as we go back further, like, did we have a different story for multifamily once? I know we did in 1940, right? Like, how far back could we go? Like, how long is this story true that we've struggled to get multifamily? And my sense is that in recent history, when some of us were working at the city, we were doing a lot more. Our market was entertaining that. And what's that correlation between our zoning and UDO or market drive or land availability? So that's not a question. It's more amusing and an inquiry if anyone does have any anecdotes around that.
Maggie, I feel like that's the same year I see big increases start in tourism as well. Dating back those years, I think sometimes, I don't know, we almost had like a little fire lit under us those years. And it might be relocation for climate change. It might be relocation because tourism was starting to skyrocket. It's an interesting question. I don't know that we'd ever be able to answer it with data, but theories are interesting.
Well, and look at a couple of aspects. One of them is look at what's outside of our limits now, like within the last couple of years. Look at what the county's doing as far as apartments now, right? So once the infrastructure is there, then they can do the apartments. If you look at the last few apartment complexes that we built, where were they building, right? They're building literally on the side of mountains. and we're just literally running out of room for many multi-buildings. And Councilwoman Ullman, you hit on, is the land a problem? Land is a big problem because we just don't have that space.
Mm-hmm. And therefore it's extremely expensive.
Yeah.
Harder to build on and must be bigger and taller and require more financing, and then poof, impossible.
Yep.
It's happening. Yeah. And we're seeing a lot more development out in the county for this reason. I like to do what I call exit interviews with developers as they come through our process. And I've heard many times it's easier and cheaper to build in the county now. And a lot of times people will say land value is the first number that hurts the cost of land.
Yep.
So Mark, are you creating more land for us or what?
I wish I could. One thing I wanted to do is, and the reason why, and a great question as to why to start at 18, the same reason why we did this one at 21. This is just an update. This is when we actually captured the usable benchmarking, the School of Government benchmarking data. And this is total permits issued, right, through development services. So in 21, we were at 12,401. 22 at 13,174, 23 at 13,108, and then at 24, 12, 226. So that's basically how the last 4 years lays out.
Mark, do you ever compare our successes like this data with other cities, or at least the trend lines? I just wonder, like with the recession, Asheville held pretty strong throughout it. I wonder if other cities are seeing bigger declines. I don't really know.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, I would say that Asheville's unique within the Western North Carolina mountains or whatever. So I'm quite sure that we probably see more, increases in a lot of the smaller areas, without a doubt.
One of the really nice things about the benchmarking project is that they have actually I think they're still fine tuning it, but it's close. It's like within a month probably. They actually have an interactive chart that you can load in. You can filter items in and out, and you can do that for all the communities that are part of the benchmarking. Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Hickory, Raleigh, Charlotte, that sort of thing. So anybody who's participating in that, you can actually put that slide and put some filters in there, and that will give you that exact information.
Now, Mark, I'm looking at these numbers here, these permitting, right? With the new system that you're putting in place to expedite things, this should be like double, right? I'm only being facetious, but it's going to make the process easier and quicker, right? So
it's going to help in a great many ways. Yes.
So that's good.
The interesting thing is that, and one thing that we used to do a while ago, and it's just too hard to grab. Also, it's just a data that doesn't work. The reality of it is, roughly these numbers are all pretty close to each other, right? Year for year, they're a little different, but they're all pretty close. And there's kind of a funnel effect, right? So we might have let's just say this year, maybe we got 14,000 applications. But these are the permits issued, right? And while we still have the same structure, while we still have the same infrastructure of capacity, of staff, of equipment, of those sort of things, we're still only going to be able to produce a somewhat similar product, right? Now, if I got 15% more staff and 15% more equipment and all that, not that I'm saying I need it, because I don't know what I'd do with that, but but then maybe those numbers pick up a little bit because they're coming through this filter that there is a capacity that is created, right? And we don't have, the numbers aren't really huge of what's being applied, but there's also a reality that there is only so much capacity to be able to do that. Now, it doesn't mean that things aren't getting processed. Once again, it just varies year by year as to what comes in and what goes out. But for the most part, we're gonna put out a very similar product as long as that number is high. If we had something that went really awry, then and those numbers obviously would dip even with keeping those same people. But if we doubled the amount of applications, we probably would be pretty close to this number. And Chairwoman Kilgore, to your statement is that next year, as we do smooth things out, we fine tune the restructuring of our departments, right? We talked about the One Stop 2.0. We talked about the different structuring of our departments lately, and an updated software, and including some processes and policies. We would be able to actually increase that, double it. I don't know, but we could probably get a quarter.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
And I think that's, once again, key takeaways, right? We talked about the construction is still strong in Asheville. We are seeing a little bit of a downturn. Residential construction, 1 and 2 families, slightly 3 and 4, but the way we calculate it was 1 and 2 is still really the strongest mover recently. Really how the data was captured, and then the benchmarking tool is going to be a huge help for us moving forward. Okay.
There's no more questions? Thank you, Mark.
And thank you all. I'm sorry. I was going to close everything up. I did have one, Councilwoman Ullman, you had asked a question and I wanted to come back to it. You had talked about turnaround times, right? As far as review times and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a hot topic. There's a couple of things that's happening. There's some legislation that happened in, I can't remember the session law. It was House Bill 677 that created basically a shot clock.
It was like 21 days, right?
Well, so the shot clock is for commercial is 45 days. And really the gist of it is if an application comes in that's signed and sealed, right? So it already has to have a design professional. And an application comes in for a permit, it has a shot clock of 45 days. And, it's legislation, so there's a lot of nuances and details in the construction industry that it doesn't cover. To your point, Councilwoman Turner, that is our goal is 21 days, right? That's our internal goal to max out at 21 days. And honestly, we're doing pretty good at getting there. We're percentages, but we're coming in pretty well with that. The interesting thing of that is that this is when an application is submitted for a permit, right? So assuming that entitlement's done, assuming that the other components of construction or the regulatory process are complete and they're ready to go out there and dig a ditch and start building a building. That is really where, at this point, what the legislation is talking about. And so there's a lot of other pieces that are involved that aren't necessarily within that, but we certainly are we're about half of that right now anyway. And then there are other components, for example, people, and it's common speak right now, so it's no surprise. A lot of people are talking about where the level ones are operating, and they're in a 10-day period, right? So if an application comes in, they're reviewed within 10 days. If something's found to be missing or incorrect, it goes out, it comes back, it gets reviewed within 10 days. So, Now that might happen. There might be cycles to that process, but the actual, as far as meeting a mandatory date or deadline, that is still within that process. I just want to kind of throw that out there, and hopefully that's getting too close to what your question was.
Yeah, the question was around the shot clock, and just I know that some of that started, and so for the millions of people listening out there, what we're referring to is that the state basically said if cities don't turn around in a certain amount of time, cities have to pay the applicant, I guess, like, or reimburse application fees. But I'm sure you can clarify more precisely what that is. But yeah, it's just kind of I think this is a really nice opportunity to hear this data updates, again, to have a wish list of, like, if I wanted to be able to really feel like I, as a decision maker, was keeping the pulse, what data would I want to see? And I'd want to see, like, you know, how long is it taking permits to happen? How long does it take people to get through our offices? And so what the metric is, I think you all will have the best expertise, but I'd love us to be in a position where we can start seeing trends over time, where if we start seeing that grow and it takes longer and longer and it's costing us money, we can then say, what's going on? And then you might say, I do need more staff or not, or I don't know what would happen. But I think just understanding, like, what's our efficiency rate for working with community partners when they want to build. And so the actual precise metric I'm less concerned about, and more like I would love to see what those indicators are, especially knowing that there's going to be a financial ticket if we are having inefficiencies. And I don't know if we've already had to pay any fees. I don't need to go on a full briefed memo of all that information, but that is something on my mind. And then, of course, I hear from community partners how long it takes, and having some data to ground truth that would be helpful. So that's where my inquiry is coming.
Yeah, and that's thank you for that explanation. And one of the things that we're working on, and I touched on this a little bit, but it's not in context yet. When I did that other presentation about the One Stop 2.0 and all that, and having multiple department agreements as to where we're at is very similar to what you just said. We're really trying to establish a baseline of operation. And once we can all agree on a baseline of operation, then we can see where the highs and lows are, right? If we have a dip and we're capturing that data, we have a dip, and that dip is just somebody was on vacation, somebody got ill, so that department was offline a little bit. But then that dip actually continues because we can't fill a position. Then maybe somebody else needs to help out, or maybe it is a staffing issue. Or maybe people are above that line all the time. I don't always want to say people are below it, because frequently we are above that. But without that baseline, we don't really know what that measurement looks like. And so that's really an important piece of this new structuring and how to run that. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Okay, thanks, Mark. The next thing on our agenda will be FY 2024 Committee Work Plan Review and FY 2025 Work Plan Development. Ben Woody, Assistant Manager, will do a review. Accomplishments from FY 2024 Planning and Economic Development Committee Work Plan, and discuss areas of focus for the committee for FY 2025's work plan. This is only for review and discussion. No vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kilgore. This is going to be a pretty brief overview. I know we've been at this for a while, so I'm going to move through it quickly. I will note, and this is in the next steps, but I will be back to you in September to close the loop on this discussion. So I'll give a little bit of background about your work plan, but what I really want PED members to do is to, between now and our September meeting, is please let me know if there are things that you want to see on the work plan. So actually, I thought the conversation we just had with Mark, there was a lot of pieces of that I heard that we need to start bringing to PED for their consideration. So that would be a good example of some feedback that we could have on your work plan. So I'm going to dive right in. Just let me know if you need me to stop. Our work plans are our tools to better organize the work of our committees. Every committee will have a work plan. Ideally, your work plan's informed by City Council's strategic priorities and goal statements. So that should really frame your work plan, how we're accomplishing those goals you've already set. The other thing that I'm interested in with PED this year that we haven't done as much of is trying to understand when we build out the work plan, are there policy considerations or specific assignments that we want to task to the advisory board? So there are 5 or 6, and we'll look at a slide, advisory boards that I think connect to PED. So that also your work plan presents an opportunity for council to direct some of the work of those advisory boards in a way that aligns with what you want to accomplish. And last thing is, work plans are dynamic. They will change throughout the course of the year. So we'll need to come back and evaluate it as we move through our fiscal year. So as a body, PED, you're looking at long-range planning and urban design department and the work they do. You're looking at our transportation policies and networks and kind of how we provide policy guidance on that. You connect to economic development strategies. So a lot of the work that CED does, I would even say some of the work that Chris Corl does falls into this bucket. And then finally, one of the things that PED is tasked with is having a more regional, I think, approach to planning and economic development. So those are kind of the 4 core tenets of your council committee. We have a list of policy areas. I'm not going to read all these to you, but these are the things that PED really is tasked with working on. And again, you see it's a mix of planning and zoning, transportation, economic development, and then you see a couple of items in there that I think have that kind of regional connection. So
that's a lot of stuff. Can you go back one more? Let me just.
Yeah. I mean, these are all within the scope of PED, these policy areas.
Culture, huh? Okay.
So I'm going to give you a list of things that I think you'll be working on for FY 25. But as you reflect on this presentation and hopefully look at it, you may have some things that you think we need to work on as a council committee. So we'll talk about that. But it is a lot. There's a large scope for this council committee. In terms of community connections, I do think there's, and again, it's real important. There are more than 20 plus advisory boards that are appointed by city council. Some of these boards would probably potentially touch multiple council committees. So I don't want to say that this is the only advisory boards that would work with PED, but I think these are the 6 advisory boards that have the most direct connection to the policy topic areas that we've established through PED. And last year we had each of these boards come to PED and give an update, kind of an annual report. We can do that again this year. We can talk about that, but then also there may be the opportunity to start to look at how these boards can connect to some of the projects or policy areas that PED is prioritizing. And then of course, we'd like to have the EDC come on a regular basis to give updates on the things that they're working on. And we had Clark Duncan last year come do that. Any questions on kind of the background of PED? You've seen that before. So I'm going to run through a list of what you did in FY24. Hopefully you remember all these things. A lot of I'd say that PED actually did a lot of great work, and a lot of projects came through PED, and even many went through council. But a couple of things that you did do last year is we've got the Pack Square Plaza Vision Plan adopted. We accepted a grant from the Mellon Foundation. Great work happening there. We got the new revised it was created in COVID, but we got the outdoor dining ordinance formally in place. Patton Avenue corridor study, that is still underway, but that is an item that's been before PED. Missing middle housing study was completed. We've done some work on development permitting. We've had a couple of meetings just discussing our homestay ordinance and kind of how that works. GAT plan implementation. We've had some updates from transportation on that. Transit is going to be a big topic for your FY25 work plan. You've had an update on personal micromobility devices, I-26 connector project. We've had an update on that, but there's a lot to be done with that again in your work plan coming up. We've had information on city property program. way back in the beginning of this FY24, John Philman was ahead of you or in front of you with our special event program, made some pretty significant changes to that program that PD considered. And finally, we've had some conversations about Thomas Wolfe Auditorium and some of his challenges here in this committee as well. So that's just an example. I think that's my last slide for 24, but that's just kind of the highlights of some of the things that this committee worked on, or at least had discussions around in FY24. It was a busy year. So if you're okay, this is the last part of the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about FY25. So this is the this is our work plan will be for this fiscal year, and this is the year that we're actually already underway, but are starting to move forward in. There's really 3 council priorities that align very nicely with PED and the scope of this committee. I am going to reference reimagining public safety and one-year projects for FY25, but typically most of the things that come to this committee are going to connect to one of these 3 strategic priorities. So I've got about 3 slides on potential FY25 work plan topics. The first 2 slides include projects that are already in our organizational work plan. So these are projects that are funded and that are planned to either continue or begin in FY25. And I'll start with one of the interesting ones is actually our business improvement district. And that is, I would say, the one project that I think actually best aligns with your reimagining public safety goals. At least it does for FY25, because one of the impetus for that was really clean and safe in the downtown area. So I actually think that's one that we're working on, and we're going to be in front of you in September with the framework for the RFP for that. But that's a good example of, I think, a project that really aligns with one of, a kind of a different council strategic priority area. And again, what we've tried to do on this is kind of show what would be the advisory board alignment with that project. So again, using business improvement district, we're actually working very closely with the downtown commission, and they've even formed a working group to help support staff and kind of provide feedback to council. And I know, Councilwoman Turner, you're on the downtown commission, so you get a kind of a up close look at that. But that's a good example, I think, of a project that lines up with FY25 well and has a good connection to an advisory board. But I'll go through the rest. We're going to implement Pack Square Vision Plan. A lot to be done with that. We had an update earlier about updating the UDO, so that'll be a pretty consistent theme throughout FY25. Mark is working on updating our land management permitting software. Got some feedback, I think, earlier about other things we can do around the development process. Want to get our arms around what implementing the GAP plan looks like. The GAP plan is our greenways, accessibility, pedestrian plans. We want to come up with a kind of a good structure for how we're implementing that plan over the next few years, in particular FY25. I-26, huge project for the community. We'll be back in front of PED, having discussions on that. One of the things that we're kicking off that we hope we can really work closely with MMTC and PED on is a transit comprehensive operational and financial assessment. That is that study that's taking a look at our transit operations. And then finally, McCormick Field, that's a huge project for the community and one that we are getting very close to beginning to move forward construction. So again, good example of a project we want to bring back to PED for regular updates. So those are the projects that are on the organizational work plan. I did ask departments to think about things that are on their department work plans. This is kind of another level down in our organizational planning process. Here are a couple of things that I heard from other departments that they'll be working on FY25. I think these are appropriate to come and have feedback from PED on. So we got our downtown design guidelines update, traffic calming policy and process update, parking operations study, which is something that's going to happen this year. And then we want to continue to talk about kind of developing or refining our city property disposition policy. So my question is for PED, how does FY25 sound to you? If you want to give some initial feedback, and are we missing anything that needs to be on this list in terms of priority projects? Go ahead, Councilman Ullman.
The two on my mind, I don't know how this will work between times coming before full council and work sessions versus committee, but I anticipate a lot more conversation around Thomas Wolfe over time. And I think, yeah, so I'm not sure where that lands. I think that there's definitely big parts, big forks in the road that are absolutely full council conversations. But there also could be roll up our sleeve work for this committee. I'm just not sure. So that would be just one to flag for where and who. But given its alignment with the work plan goals and the committees, this might be one. The other is a similar conversation around the bond. I'm very hopeful it will pass. And I'm going to work with the community campaign to promote it. And then we're going to have to decide how to spend the money. And there's if it passes, there'll be a transportation component. There'll be parks, housing, core infrastructure, et cetera. And I would think that there needs to be some back and forth between staff who's analyzing all the existing capital needs and all the maintenance repairs. Like there's a lot of stuff that the policymakers won't be able to say if we should spend 200,000 here or 250,000 there, or if it's this roof or that. Like that's not our role. But I do think that there's some real fork in the road things around like what is the strategy that some rolling up our sleeve when it actually comes down to project prioritization that I think committees should be looked to. Because there will be a big gulf then between staff making a ton of decisions for $80 million and council, because all of it won't be full council conversation. So I think that there could be a really good place, particularly for the transportation bond, perhaps the core services, but those are two that I'd put out there of what's that line between committee work versus full council work, but things that I hope that we all roll up our sleeves on in the coming year.
I love that, Maggie. Transportation bond planning was also on mine because I almost don't want it to get too far along that we can't work with it.
Yes.
It's too molded. Questions I had that might be little updates necessarily, not necessarily projects, but I know we're really hoping to see an update to the hotel overlay and whether or not it needs actual updates. I know I saw the new hotel dashboard. Holy cow, that is a great tool. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But really, if we need to update that ordinance. Another one, as you go through the transportation, I guess, study that's happening, I wonder if that one envelopes this thing that we used to talk about a lot that seems to have disappeared, which is the idea of a circulator shuttle. It died with COVID. It was part of the TMIP process that the CVB was putting together. But is that still out there? We had done a study assessing routes and stuff. Is that part of the transit operational study? I don't know. I think we'll probably want to squeeze another STR update in here along the way. The big one I have that is kind of a project possibility is understanding quote unquote infrastructure. So every time we go into a large CZ project, I'll use Hall Creek because it's the last one we just did. We hear time and time again, this neighborhood isn't ready, the infrastructure isn't ready, we don't have the infrastructure. And it's just like this token word now. And I would love for us to better be able to educate the community on what is prepared infrastructure and what isn't. Like, worried about traffic is not an infrastructure problem. But it's just, I wonder if there's a component here that we could, on the front end, be educating community members around and identifying where infrastructure needs to be improved. And I don't know how we would even begin to look at that, but it comes to mind a lot. And then the other one I had a note on here is micro mobility rentals. I know we okayed them for personal use, but are rentals queuing up at all? That was a discussion that was on the plate at one point. And then I have heard some regular feedback about our HRC commission. And at some point there was discussion around whether or not it might need some adjusting. I don't know, but I saw them mentioned as another advisory board aligned with us. And I'm just putting it out there that that commission might need some updates too.
It's great feedback. Thank you, both everybody. So anything else?
One more. Ben, did you ever receive, there was a group of organized folks in downtown that were becoming more and more concerned around the design of buildings. And I don't mean at the design review level, but like, are we still getting beautiful historic buildings? And they had gone through the process of drafting potential ordinances, legislation that would be like a incentive-based program if you did excellent design. And I don't know if that ever made it anywhere, or if, did you ever even see it in your department?
I don't think I ever saw it. It doesn't ring a bell to me, but I can check in with some folks.
I don't know that it needs to become a council priority, but it might be something that, comes into this design guidelining and updates and stuff.
Right. Okay. Well, that was actually, to be on the fly, really excellent feedback from the committee. So I think I only have one more slide. Yeah. So next steps, and I know we've been a long meeting today. So I will be back on September 9th to finalize your FY25 work plan. So I'll kind of condense this down to really what the work plan will include. And we can talk about that list of projects, maybe begin to talk about how we schedule those out. I really want to get some feedback on how we can kind of begin to kind of empower our advisory committees to help us with this work as well. So maybe we can dig a little deeper in September 9th. Following that, I think then we can give any direction back to advisory boards that we need to based on what I hear from PED. And yeah, I think that's it. And then, maybe in terms of the annual updates from advisory boards, maybe once we understand the work plan, we can kind of schedule those updates around or schedule those to sync with certain projects that they're working on. So again, I just want to try to put all this together as best we can and hopefully have a great FY25. So any other questions on that?
No, but great job. That was a lot of work we've already started and get moving. So I feel like this is a busy time of year for this particular department committee.
It is. You're a busy committee and there's a lot going on that connects to this committee. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for what you do though.
Thank you, Ben. At this time, I'd like to take our public comment. Katie, do we have anyone in the queue?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do. Just one moment. Caller ending in 7632. Your line is now open and you will have 3 minutes to speak.
Good evening, Planning and Economic Development. This is Jared Wheatley. I am just wanting to step in and provide a little public comment today because Planning and Economic Development is interwoven with housing policy, and it touches all aspects of our residents' lives. That's everything from kind of jobs, education, and healthcare, but it's also community and culture. And what many people have said over the last few years is that our UDO is air quotes broken. And this term kind of gets bounded about and used a little bit loosely. And I don't think there's a great definition for it. However, when I look at it and when I think about broken, what appears is that it's disequitable or inequitable, and that it's not aligned with the comp plan or really any specialized plan. I looked back at the 2009 sustainability plan for our city, and it talks about this idea of activating commercial corridors and transportation corridors. And then we have in 2014 UDO amendments that passed that allowed for increased density incentives for affordable housing projects containing more than 20% affordability. And it didn't actually trigger any change in the development pattern because it didn't include the removal of parking minimums, nor did it enhance or increase or change project level thresholds. Fortunately, both of those amendments are before you currently. But as a working class person, as an Indigenous person, I also think about broken in terms of systemic racism and, a lack of opportunity for the working class, like we saw from Mark Matheny. permit values, the number of permits are going down and the permit values are going up, which means those who have money can actually afford housing. Meanwhile, those who can't afford housing are relegated to the county and are therefore more auto dependent and therefore are more burdened by automobiles and are less likely to have job opportunities and chances for education and to engage with community and culture. And therefore, if you are not actually for amending the UDO towards any improvement, you're actually along the lines of acceptance of the current UDO and its exclusionary zoning practices that do not align with our current goals for our city, and nor have they been the goals of our city for more than 20 years. So thank you for your time. I appreciate everyone's hard work on this topic.
Madam Chair, that was our only caller.
Okay. So at this time, do we have any more comments or questions before we adjourn? Not. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate all the collaboration and a great meeting. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.